Say hey, everybody. Welcome to Tier Talk here on Sorare FP. I'm Alex Hooper, joined by the great one, KLamp1, one of my favorite managers on the platform, one of the most successful managers on the platform. I love to hype him up and embarrass him, but I do mean it. And then also from Sorare, the face of Sorare MLB. I don't know if he wants me to call him that, but it's starting to be the case, Everett. Everett Case.
I'll take it, I suppose.
All right, so we're here to talk about the tiers in terms of rewards and where players are put, how they are rewarded out in that structure, what kind of drives those decisions, what could cause a player to move up and down. And then the fun part is us managers, Kevin and I, are going to, I'll say, air our grievances, but not so much the case. But regardless, we will make our case for or against a player being in a certain tier, and that'll come up a little bit later. But first, Everett, I'm going to toss it over to you to just kind of give everybody a background on how this goes, how decisions are made, and anything else you want to let the community know.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I'll keep it pretty high level as an overview, which, maybe kind of repeating some things that the community already knows. And then, we can talk more in depth if we want to poke on any of the things that I talk about. But just really quickly, the reason why we have tiers in the first place and why we think they're important is it's our way of balancing some degree of predictability around what your rewards might be, while maintaining that surprise and delight reveal moment of figuring out who exactly the card that you've won is, which I think is an important element of the platform that people appreciate. The lack of certainty can sometimes be a positive thing. Obviously, some people have different preferences and want to know exactly what it is that they're going for. But in various surveys that we've run and community feedback that we've received, that kind of surprise reveal moment is one of the hallmarks of the platform. But we do want to make sure that there is some predictability around who you might expect to see there. And so that's the reason for the tiers. Some background on how they're generated, because I've seen a lot of questions around the construction of the individual tiers. Each tier, the tiers are set as a percentage of the player population, which is important for us to maintain supply across all of the player population, as we give different amounts of different tiers in different competitions. We auction players of different tiers at different cadences. And so it's important for us to have a set number or a set percentage of players that are in one tier versus the next. So as the player population grows, which it will over the course of the next few weeks as more players get minted, now that opening day full rosters are set, now that a bunch of players that we couldn't create season cards, the player population will grow, and each tier will grow accordingly, not at the same rate. Obviously, you can see tier 1 is much smaller. Tiers 3, 4, and 5 are larger, but the rough percentage of how many available players fall into what tier will be consistent over the course of the season. And then how are we deciding what players go into what tier? As has been kind of figured out by the community at this point, we have an algorithm that takes
We didn't want to hear about this anyway.
Actually, the goal of it is to approximate the market value.
We lost you for a second there.
Sorry. I'll just repeat the last part in case you guys missed it. Fundamentally, what the algorithm is trying to do is approximate the market value of an individual card. And there are a variety of other inputs in there that so that we're not inflating the value if jersey match cereal happened to sell yesterday, for example. And there are also a variety of challenges that come across the varying liquidity of different cards. So it's not necessarily as simple as just saying, why don't we just take the floor price on the secondary market, which is something that we've seen quite a bit as a potential solve. There's just the liquidity. Individual data point is going to be incomplete, which is why we end up complicating it somewhat with the ultimate goal of trying to approximate the value of a card. We try to do that as objectively as possible, which is why when we get suggestions, the way that we try to internalize them is how can we augment or tweak the existing algorithm to get a better output, as opposed to how do we override it, because the more subjectivity that gets put into it, the more it can be attacked, frankly, and people have different perspectives as to who belongs in what tier, as we'll spend the bulk of this conversation debating, a variety of the players that are kind of on that borderline. So that's just a little peek behind the curtain of what's happening behind the scenes as these are getting generated, and where some of the issues that we've seen historically have cropped up. And as we see and identify more season progresses and new players get added to a player population that is otherwise fairly static, the value of those players relative to the rest of the pool can spike. You'll see examples of this where somebody is in tier 2, but realistically feel like quality of player wise belongs more in tier 3, for example. The challenge for us in how exactly to mitigate that players is not one size fits all. Like prospect pedigree carries a lot of weight in how quickly these players D or A appreciate in value, and what they're actually doing on the field is going to start becoming more impactful the more sample size we have of them performing on the field. So it's challenging for us to make a call definitively as to how we should handle these new entrants into the player pool, because sometimes they're heavily hyped prospects that join in tier 2 and stay there, like Michael Harris from last season. And sometimes they're hyped prospects that don't meet expectations right out of the gate. Market value dwindles a little bit as their gameplay and utility value dwindles. And then, maybe they recover in a few months and they vary between tiers 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 again. But we don't know how these players are going to perform when they hit the field in Major League Baseball for the first time. So that just is one of the challenges that we've run into in the more frequently noted outlier cases. But we do attempt to address those with mitigations around outlier sales prices and limitations on how quickly players are inserted into tiers relative to when they're inserted into auctions. But it's always going to be somewhat imperfect, but an area that we continue to try to improve.
You're muted, Alex. Hey, Alex, I'm showing you as muted.
Hey. Yeah, I can't hear you.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
There you go.
All right. Little technical difficulty here to start. My bad. I was just thanking you for a comprehensive breakdown, and I was going to throw it over to Kevin to ask some questions that I know he's kind of pulled from the community. So I will stay unmuted, but I will throw it to you.
Thanks. And I apologize. You cut out a couple times there too, Everett. So if I'm asking something that you responded to, we just might not have heard it. Well, one of the questions we got was cadence of the tiers. Is there, a set kind of schedule for when they're updated? And if so, kind of can you talk about that?
New game week going live, and they can update as frequently as daily. We don't always update them daily. They will probably update more frequently earlier on in the season as we're trying to introduce new players into reward tiers as they enter the auction population. But as the season progresses, they update less frequently just because the variability between them is less impactful. but they can update as frequently as daily. And we always try to update them before game weeks lock or before game weeks close and rewards are delivered to make sure that we're leveraging the most recent data when we go through the reward delivery process.
Okay. And I do have more questions from the community, but one that I've personally harped on a lot and would like to see is there any chance of community input into the tiers? Specifically one thing I've wanted to see is like a pro rel kind of system where we get to vote on one player we want to move up or one player we want to move down. Is that a possibility? And would you consider that?
Yeah, I think it's something that we could consider. I mean, I mentioned before, we try to keep these as objectively generated as possible. But I think there's a balance there of, there's at a certain number, the community sentiment is objective in its own right? So I think there's opportunities for us to be more transparent in the variation across tiers. So it's something that we're open to exploring. We don't have any near-term plans to do that, just because first we want to make sure that the tweaks that we've made to the algorithm are actually improving the output, and hopefully get to a point where the output is sufficiently improved that type of manual adjustment isn't required. But that's probably a bit of a white whale. So I think at some point, getting more people involved in at least the conversation around that and making sure that
I just saw a comment that Alex's beard looks better on mute. But
wish I could mute
one in the comments was, and this is something I've seen before is, is there any consideration of handling rewards like you do with player swaps, giving you a choice of 4 or 5 players? I know I've seen that before. My thought has always been that logistically that would be kind of difficult to implement, things like that. But can you talk on that?
Yeah, similarly, not something that we're currently thinking about. I've certainly seen the suggestion quite a bit. Being added to your gallery as something that's, an exciting and I think differentiating part of the Sorare experience. But I do know that people generally want more agency over the outcome of their game weeks. And so it's something that we're exploring, like what is the best way to deliver that? Maybe it doesn't take the exact form of, here are some options for you to pick from, but some other way for managers to have more agency over what the reward that they receive is definitely something that we're thinking about.
I think that also, if you allowed people to pick who they wanted, it would create a nightmare obviously from just the amount of cards that would flood the market due to hype, this, that, or the other, but also like game theory. It would be interesting, but it would create kind of an avalanche of sorts where you would almost be picking for differential a lot of time, or just picking the same star that's available as everyone else. It would logistically be really tough, even on the managers. I would think so.
I think so.
I agree with that part of it. I think at scale it'd be difficult, but if it's something something to include in a reward box or something you can use coins to do one exchange, where if it's very limited, that would be something where I could see managers getting some more excitement out of reward boxes for something like that, as well as not having those problems you have at a larger scale. Let's see. Another question we had was about how the rankings within tiers work in terms of if I place 40th, am I guaranteed to get a guy that's at least by the algorithm higher than number 43? Is that how that works? Or is it all random? Can you talk on that?
At a high level, yes, that's the goal. Obviously, like the variation between those players, and as you get into the depths of some of the tiers, can be so small that what was 40th versus 43rd and 10 minutes ago may be different. But that is generally the goal. We would like you to feel more rewarded the higher you finish on the leaderboard, and finishing in 10th should always feel better than finishing in 12th and all the way down the line. It's obviously imperfect as everybody kind of values players slightly differently. But that is certainly the goal.
That sounds good. Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, and I think for the most part, the community sentiment has been that these tier lists look pretty good. We've certainly seen worse ones, but I do think more issues may arise, and people might have more complaints when they actually start getting these rewards. And someone prefers a guy over another guy, and when we see how it actually shakes out within the tiers. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens there and how that moves around. But yeah, and I want to say that I do understand that value is subjective, and we're always going to. I mean, Alex and I have pretty similar views on players, and we still disagree on a fair amount. So I mean, no matter what, no one's going to be. You're never going to make everyone happy with that, but the more people we can get happy, the better. And especially at the top, I know for me at least, and whether it's me or someone else, I think the thing that we don't want is someone podiuming and being upset about the player that they got. I think that's probably the most important thing we can get right, is making sure that tier ones and the guys that are going to the people on the podiums are cards that people are excited about. Again, I think for the whole of the game, that's probably the most important thing we can do.
Yeah, and
totally agree.
On that note, I've heard and even made the argument at times for like a tier 0, a star tier, but like technically with the structure, it almost wouldn't have to matter if things are tiered within tiers, sort of thing, and value is driven in an algorithmic way that kind of always puts those guys up there. So just the designation of it. Again, I know I've thrown that out there before, but has that been something that you've given any extra amount of thought to, Everett?
Yeah, it is. It's something that we've talked about quite a bit. The biggest challenge with it is just overall player population, right, and the restriction that we feel is important for us to be able to maintain supply. You could imagine instead that there's like a cliff after a certain valuation that you drop from one tier to the next. We've explored that, and as it plays out, it ends up creating more problems than it solves in terms of like overall card supply management across the broader population. So it's not off the table. It's something that we may end up doing at some point, having like a manually curated tier 0. But we also want to make sure that the best cards in the game feel accessible to players. And the more we decrease the number at the very top, the fewer opportunities there are for us to distribute those cards across all of the leaderboards that we offer. So that's a balance. Like we want, obviously it's important that tier 1s are included across leaderboards. That's an area of feedback that we've taken on, particularly at this.
Understood.
So as we further decrease the number of tiers, it will create more problems with our ability to distribute the best cards across all of our leaderboards.
Gotcha.
Kind of tangential to that. I know I've heard talk about like a 60-40 split. That's kind of your guys' goal. Is that accurate, or is that something that has bubbled up, and does that play a role? And also, I know you talked a little bit about the tiers are going to get bigger and things like that. But I know a couple people looking at the sizes of the tiers. We're looking at, hey, it looks like tier 1s are going to get minted to about 60. If there's a 60-40 split, is that kind of match with your expectations and all that?
Yeah, we have rough allocations across what percentage of the minted population is reserved for rewards, reserved for referrals and other like growth promotion levers, reserved exclusively for primary auctions, reserved for instant buy as that rolls out across more scarcities. The allocations are a little bit fuzzier than like a hard and fast rule against what is allocated, but we do have general goals around what percentage of cards we reserve to sell and what we reserve for the community.
That totally tracks. And does that vary player to player? Because we did just get a question. Our first place is going to get more top guys like Ohtani, Acuna this year. Last year, those guys being rewarded was very rare. I think someone did the math on that, and I don't remember what it said. But do those allocations change on a player-by-player basis, or is it same across the board?
Not intentionally. We don't do anything, certainly like manually or algorithmically, to vary those allocations across players. Obviously, as the sample size increases, it's possible that you see outliers in terms of distribution for individual players, but that's not the intent.
Understood. Kevin, any more questions before we start to get into player-by-player discussions?
Last one I had was just about the differences between scarcities. If that's necessary or not. Why that happens, and just kind of connected to that. And some of these other questions is or at least a suggestion that I saw was for these edge cases. The guys that are in one tier for one and a different tier for another, for ones that there's a lot of questions. Have you thought about just putting those ones in reward boxes so that it's not something where someone is earning a T1 or a T2 and being disappointed because it's a guy that's overvalued, something like that?
Yeah, good question. So the primary reason for tiers being different across scarcities is for the players that are on the borderline between one tier and the next. The player population at any given already minted limited cards of more players than we've minted super rare cards of, for example. So that's one area where the denominator at limited might be 500 players in it. Super rare, it might be 450 players. And so something that would be on the fringe of one tier or the next could fall into a different one based on, what the denominator is as we allocate those percentages. We've had conversations about whether it makes more sense to just simplify that across the board and have a uniform tier list that applies across all speeds. They're of somewhat materially different value at different scarcities, just based on, for example, like younger players occasionally will see a higher premium at super rare than limited, for example. Like respectful of the fact that potentially managers at different scarcities are valuing these players a little bit differently. So that can drive some of that as well. But ultimately, it probably does make sense in the long run to simplify this and have one more uniform tier list. They're just making sure that we are comfortable with how we handle all of those edge cases where the valuation might be somewhat different, is our current blocker on that. But eventually, it may be something that we just unify. Because I do think it leads to confusion, particularly in cases like this where why is he here at limited and here at rare? And the answer is, not necessarily a great one, obviously. So I think there's area to simplify that.
Understood. All right. Well, I've been staring at my agenda here, and I'm ready to nitpick some of those edge cases, and do what I do at least better, and talk about some baseball. So, do I have to go ahead to do that? Can I bring up my first?
Please do.
All right.
You'll never guess who it is.
Yeah, if you know me, you would never guess who I'm going to bring up. I do think it segues into a lot of different discussions really well. But I will start by saying this player is, I would say, the most underrated player in baseball of this generation, for one. Secondly, I have him projected as the number 10 scorer across all of Sorare this season. And as of the publishing of the tiers, this man was listed as a tier 2 in rare. So he is kind of one of those edge cases. He's a tier 1 unlimited. And I'm talking about Jose Ramirez, Guardians third baseman, small market, again, kind of underappreciated, and I've seen that firsthand. But the reason I wanted to bring Jose up, especially being one of those edge cases, is I always recommend him to people when they ask me, like, who do I want to go get to start building my team? Because to me, you want to have a few stars when building your team, but you want the ones that are not valued by the market. And Jose Ramirez is really the case for that to me. I mean, there are some other ones, but so his projections are super high and his production has been super high, except maybe save last year. It was a little down, but the market, as long as I've been on Sorare MLB, since Sorare MLB launched, has never really caught up to what I believe he is truly worth. So that starts a discussion of how much should the price factor into a player's place on a reward tier versus a lot of other things like the output and like, you know, for me, the projections mean so much to me. So I probably overvalue the projections in terms of price. So I know I'm going all over the place here, but it's just price pushing someone up versus what their expected outcome is. And that's kind of the baseline before you start getting into some of those other things. So I mean, I made my case. I frankly think he's a tier 1 across the board, but if I want Jose Ramirez, if I fell a position out of a tier 1 spot and had the top tier 2 spot and Jose Ramirez popped up, I would run laps around my neighborhood. So, and that's even if I wasn't a Guardians fan, and even if I haven't laughed at the man in person so many times because he's hilarious. But I'll get off my Jose soapbox.
Nice. Yeah, one thing, you know, and I don't think this gets into so much as kind of how the algorithm works, but more of kind of, you know, when I talk about value, what am I talking about? Or, you know, just kind of what should a tier 1 be? For me, it's a foundational player. It should be a player, like Alex said, that you can build your roster around. And, you know, I mean, there's, you know, JRAM does bring up a lot of kind of the interesting points around this, including, you know, he's on a bad team, you know, and part of it is, you know, the run production is going to be the offense is very bad. At least they
undefeated. Undefeated.
So are the Twins. But you know, but that's part of it is, you know, and we'll get into this also, you know, with the players that aren't as good but are on much better teams and kind of how that, you know, the interaction there. But again, you know, regardless of price, you know, and again, whether that's the community voting or something else, like if there's a player that you can build a roster, like you can build your entire gallery around to win consistently. And J-Ram's one of those guys, you know, he is, whether or not, you know, he's $20 for a limited or $100, like, you know, I mean, he's one of those guys. And yeah, for me, I mean, it shouldn't even be a question, but that's where I'm at. And I will certainly disagree with Alex on other points, probably immediately after this. But yeah, JRAM should be a tier 1 in all scarcities.
And it's just, to me, it's just about the question of, you know, if the market doesn't value someone as much as maybe I or someone else smarter than me says it should that knock them down a tier or anything like that? So I just wanted to bring.
I think that's opportunity. I think that's opportunity for you, frankly. I think. I mean, I agree with your categorization of Ramirez as arguably the most underrated player of his generation. It's been true for a while. It's true across the broader market. Frankly, like he's still underdrafted in season-long fantasy baseball. He hasn't seemed to slow down at all as he's aging. So to me, that's, you know, those are opportunities, right? If everybody was valued in terms of market price exactly equivalent to their expected utility, then where's the fun in that, right? So I think part of it is finding those opportunities where you feel like the market is not valuing someone correctly. And I think, you know, Ramirez is a prime example of that.
Yeah. And I mean, those opportunities, like you said, that's what makes the game fun to me. That's what helped me survive in the early days, and that's what started this channel. So you're not going to get any arguments from me out of that. I think the only reason it was like I see him as a tier 2, and I'm just like, I feel personally disrespected, but I feel that way when I see his price compared to other people on the market. So it's not a Sorare problem. It's everyone else. It's all of you people. You need to stop sleeping on Jose Ramirez and appreciate the man while we have him. Okay, so I'm off my soapbox. Now, I thought we got a good overview of that. I want to move on to someone I'm on the other side of the spectrum on. And again, it's just for question purposes. And I know Kevin is going to be on the opposite end for me theoretically as I argue the other side of this point. But the one person who stood out to me on the other end when I saw tier 1, and there really weren't a ton, it was Oneil Cruz. When I looked at the tier 1s in week 1, I thought one of these things is not like the other. And I felt that way because Oneil Cruz really hasn't done, I don't want to say anything because that's just a bold-faced lie, but he was hitting, I think, like 232, 242 last year, then broke his leg and lost him for the season. He hasn't done a ton to, I would say, earn the tier 1. And again, I might be pushing it there, but all you have to do is look at the guy and you understand why he's there. And then, he hits a game-tying bomb yesterday, and then I have to walk into this conversation with my tail between my legs and pretend like that didn't happen as well. But really the crux of it is I don't think he has the resume of these other guys. And I feel like that's what pushes you up into tier 1 as opposed to tier 2. Again, just theoretically. But at the same time, he has a pretty direct comparison in Elly De La Cruz. And if you ask me where Elly De La Cruz deserves to be eventually, I would say tier 1. So I like that juxtaposition where I feel one way about Oneil Cruz, and then all of a sudden Elly De La Cruz, I feel like he's a shoe-in to tier 1. So I will concede to Kevin and to Everett, but I just wanted to bring that point up.
Yeah. I'll let Kevin talk about the players specifically, but one thing that are two of the most exciting young players in the game. So understandable valuation. But the other thing on Oneil is because he was injured for much of last season, there are far fewer Oneil Cruz cards available on the platform. And so if you want an Oneil Cruz card, you need to be buying a current season Oneil Cruz card because there are very few previous ones. Whereas most of the competition at the tier 1 level, if you really want a Mike Trout card or a Ronald Acuna Jr. card or a Shohei Ohtani card, you may have already had one, or you may choose to buy one from a previous season that's going at less of a current season premium. That's not really an option for Oneil Cruz. And so hitting bombs every single game. But that's part of why card.
We lost the back end of that one, but
I lost the very end, but
I wouldn't have considered that. I wouldn't have considered that. That's not something that I think about when I look at, I go into my spreadsheet because I'm not tracking that. So again, that's a nice window into something that a hole in my argument, a hole in my viewpoint. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, no. And I mean, I think one of the interesting kind of areas that Oneil Cruz brings up along those lines is excitement for him, and that plays out in price. We bid him up. Same thing with Elly De La Cruz, and that, I mean, I don't know, I paid a crazy amount for an Elly just because I want one, and I don't have him in a fantasy league, and so it's something where for players like that, I know his value isn't the $75 or $100 necessarily. I mean, if I can get Ramirez for $30, they should be the same price, right? I get that. So I know that. But in terms of, excitement for the players, yeah. I mean, like I would be disappointed if I won a tier 1 and it was, I don't know, Lindor or even Ramirez, and a T2 below me ends up getting O'Neill Cruz or Ellie De La Cruz. I would be pretty upset. The flip side of that, though, is, the next guy that I have on my list is Yamamoto, who, he has no cards. He's brand new, a lot of excitement for him. And he's selling for an insane amount of money. And I don't think he's that good. I mean, he's a great pitcher, but I mean, Spencer Strider is probably the only guy right now that should be a T1 as a pitcher. And I mean, there's arguments for a few others I can see. If you want to bump up Corbin Burns, maybe Edwin Diaz, if you want to get a relief pitcher in there, but Yamamoto is certainly not there. But I lost Alex. But yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that you said earlier, Everett, which kind of made me laugh to myself was, well, we don't know how these guys are going to turn out. And I would disagree with that. I would say that especially, right now, we know more about players than anyone has ever known about baseball players in history. With O'Neill Cruz specifically, I mean, we can see now on a game-to-game, on a rolling basis, how his swing decisions are changing, how the holes in his swing, he's fixing them. And I think, for me at least, I went all in on O'Neill Cruz because it's like we know what the problems are, and he clearly is able to address them. Whereas with Yamamoto, we don't know, yet. It's we're better at kind of figuring out people coming over from Japan, how it's going to translate and all of that. But even then, I don't think anyone is projecting him to be Spencer Strider, by any means. And so I think that's I know guys last year, like there were some Reds pitchers. I want to say Andrew Abbott was one who, he was selling for $30 or $60. And anyone that's following prospects know he's not the guy. He doesn't have the stuff. He doesn't have the pedigree. No one thinks he's going to be an ace level pitcher, but he's selling for that much. And so, the one thing that I think when you're using an algorithm primarily based on price, that's fine for the limited level because there's so much more liquidity there. And I know you've touched on liquidity, but that's fine because you can sell him. If you don't like him, sell him. I mean, that's what Alex does in his videos every week. He's like, all right, I won this reward. Here's how much he sells for. Who are the other guys at this price that I can get? And which ones do I like better? But at Super Rare, you can't do that. I mean, the liquidity is not there. And so, for O'Neill Cruz, there's going to be guys that are excited for him. For Andrew Abbott, I don't know. It's a little bit sharper at the top levels. People are probably going to look into it and know, and, there's all these weird factors that play into it. What matchups are coming up, things like that, So, I mean, if he does, if he's got the White Sox or the A's coming up, yeah, maybe he is going to spike. And I don't know if the algorithm right now is even taking matchups, into account, like what's happening 2 weeks from now, because that affects value, And so those are all my thoughts. I don't know if you want to add anything, please feel free.
No, totally. That all makes sense. I will just say,
sorry to get us off the rundown there, but that was just something that,
No, I fully appreciate that. And it's kind of a broader thing and some of the broader things that people want to hear. So I don't need to rail on who I disagree with that much. So no, I appreciate that and for getting us through my technical error. I got so mad that you said you wouldn't want Hosey and then Lindor in the same sentence, and I had to go yell at a wall for a second. So apparently I broke more than just my own brain. So, okay. But did you hit on the Trout versus Bichette debate? Because that was the last little niche that I kind of wanted to touch on. Okay. All right. So Kevin and I kind of had this conversation off air and siloed when we were kind of talking things through. But an edge case in more than one way was Mike Trout versus, I almost said Dante Bichette, Bo Bichette. you kind of covered what leads a player to be split, and you have that in both of these cases. Mike Trout's a tier 1 limited, tier 2 rare. Bichette, tier 2 limited, tier 1 rare, and super rare. We've already talked about some of the differences between these two and how it might affect the algorithm. But the big difference we saw between these two, and I think we both said that in a vacuum, we would rather have Bichette if we finished a certain point, which is crazy to say because Mike Trout's Mike Trout. But between the age, Mike Trout being older, and this is what I really wanted to touch on and how this might affect the algorithm, is certain things affect scoring a little, I don't know if it's disproportionately or just more proportionately. They're metrics that you aim for, or that we aim for, and one of them is stolen bases as kind of an alpha. Obviously, homers are a bit of an alpha, but stolen bases, especially with the new rules, change things a little bit. And you get that more from Bichette. Mike Trout's kind of stopped running, I think, really since he broke his finger on second base a couple of years back. Another one of those fun freak injuries. And then the last one between the two is positional value. I talk about this all the time, value over replacement player, and how middle infield is much more top heavy than, say, the outfield, where at least in terms of players who populate that, pantheon of each position. So, like, for me, Mike Trout will probably, I'm pretty sure he outprojects Bichette in my projections by quite a bit. But I would rather have Bichette because I want to be able to plug him into my middle infield spot and maybe find a cheaper option in the outfield. So all of that to say, do age, certain scoring factors, and position factor into the algorithm over and above how it impacts each player's price? Because I'm not sure that all of those things do.
Not specifically, although all of them we've seen in our data very materially impact price, as you can imagine. Less so the specific scoring categories, I will say. So I think there is still alpha opportunity if you think, for example, stolen bases are undervalued. I think there's a perception that they are less predictable than some of the other stat categories. And I think that whether that is definitively less true or will become less true, one of those things is going to be true as a result of the new rules. I don't know how confident we can project them now, but I think we're going to get materially better at it with the new rules. So I think there's still alpha there in terms of stolen bases.
Okay.
Consistently across all players. So that is definitely considered by the algorithm.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So I'll keep preaching it, but I don't have to scream about it at all.
The other thing is, I think if you could guarantee that I would get a fully healthy season out of Mike Trout, I might take him over Bichette, even with the positional value. I think part of it is the downside risk at the age of Trout and with the injury history. I'm with you. I would take Bichette over Trout for sure right now. But if somebody could look into a crystal ball and tell me I was going to get 150 games out of Trout, I'd probably change my mind.
Absolutely. And I would imagine the market would reflect that as well too. So yeah, like you said. All right. So that does it for tier 1. I think topic wise, there was one more thing I wanted to touch on, and that's down in tier 2. But before we move on, Kevin, anyone in tier 1 that you wanted to touch on, or Everett even? No? All right. Then let's go to tier 2. There's one player that I know Kevin and I disagree on, but the last thing we kind of talked about or wanted to talk about is Michael Harris and Max Muncy. Both exist in tier 2. I think price-wise, personally, as it stands, Michael Harris is overvalued. I would probably say that Max Muncy is undervalued. I would probably move Max Muncy down into tier 3 if I were just, point and clicking. But the thing with these two is the team context and how that impacts things. We already kind of know how these things factor in and why that might push someone's price up and might push them up in the algorithm as well. But the team context impact for Michael Harris, who is a tier 1 in rare currently, and someone I could not get my hands on despite trying early. So again, understood. And then Max Muncy with the Dodgers. I don't know that I want to ask, should it impact things, because it's going to one way or another. But I guess, Kevin, I'll kick it to you. Where do you think those two guys should end up? And if you could explain some of it through the lens of team context, that'd be great for me.
So production-wise, I would say Michael Harris isn't a T1. And this is something that just came up. I might have been with you that I was talking to Alex in terms of, hey, should I buy Michael Harris? And it's like, well, here's the thing with Michael Harris. He's never going to be a better option at outfield than another guy on his team. So it's hard. I mean, I think his value should be deflated because if you're looking for an outfielder, there's always going to be a better one who has the same exact matchup as him. So in that sense, there's that. On the other hand, there's obviously the sense of, whether you call it stacking or whatever, people kind of want to put together a team, a collection, whatever. So, their value gets kind of pumped up from that. I think in terms of rewards, which means everything else being equal, if I'm receiving a guy, I don't want a guy whose value is dependent on the other guys on his team, because I probably don't have those guys on my team, or at least I might not. And so in that sense, I hate to see, Michael Harris being a T1 for someone that is like, well, I'm never going to have the cards of the big guy. I can't compete with, whoever, whether it's, Zuby or Aced Out, I'm not going to compete with them. So I'm going to stack, the kind of guys a tier below that, because when they have a good matchup, when it's their week, I have a chance of actually winning, because I'm not going to beat a guy, the guys that are running Matt Olson and Ozzie Albies, and, they also have Spencer Strider and they also have Corbin, they've got all the best players, and I'm not going to beat them. So, for someone like that, getting a Michael Harris sucks. I mean, to be honest, because it puts you in a worse position if you're playing him. And, kind of when I saw the light the first year of Sorare was, and I realized how often I was sitting Vlad, who is a great player. And I mean, he hasn't been as good as he was a couple of years ago, but I mean, he's still a top player, but the matchups just weren't there, on weeks where he had a good matchup, there was sometimes someone with a better matchup. And so I was sitting him a ton. But I know a lot of folks feel obligated if you pay $100 for a card, and that's half the value of your gallery. You kind of feel obligated to play them, even if it's not the best matchup. You just kind of talk yourself into it, and I'll feel terrible if I don't play Michael Harris and he has a good week. So, I think that's the issue that I see with these guys. In terms of kind of the fact that so much of their value is tied up in the team context, and it's tied up in how other managers are playing, but many managers, aren't kind of seeing those same benefits. It's a small percentage that are driving up the prices, which is, just kind of broadly speaking, the issue that we have with just using prices as the kind of gauge of where folks should end up on the tiers.
It's funny, something I'm just kind of realizing talking about this, and I could be just making something up completely, but sometimes it's nice to have players who are cheaper ways into that team. So, like, technically, Michael Harris is cheaper than Ronald Acuna, and that gets you Braves exposure. And I think he's like hitting 6-7 today. I don't remember, but that's kind of up towards, your Rileys and your Olsons, and then that's a legitimate actual stack without any gap in between them. And then Muncy's kind of the same thing where he hits in the middle of that order and he can occupy a corner infield spot for you, and you don't have to pay for Freddie Freeman, who I also think is pretty undervalued market-wise too. That's beside the point. Sometimes, though, I wonder if those guys who are valuable start to trend up in value because they're undervalued. Does that make sense? Like, if I think the market and I think the players are smart enough at this point to see that window into a team and see that, hey, Max Muncy is a little undervalued, and that can then start to push them up. And then, like you said, Kevin, as a reward, that can be disappointing. So I definitely understand the struggle on your side, Everett, and the teams to try and work out those kinks, because there are so many individual bases where that happens. So I thought those two were very interesting in that sense.
Yeah, we certainly see a premium for, like, last season, for the bulk of the season, it was a Braves premium where the overall value from a utility perspective of those players was pretty appreciably more than, you know, the comparable players in terms of output, just because they were on the Braves. And part of that is, you know, obviously stacking is a viable strategy, and so people want in on multiple players from the same team. The Braves offense was historically good last year, so good team to invest in. They were World Series favorites for a decent amount of time. So if you look to the postseason as teams dwindle, you know, getting in earlier versus before those prices spike gives you the opportunity to play throughout the postseason. So we definitely saw, you know, material Braves premium that I think this season we're seeing comparable Dodgers premium without really much depreciation in the Braves premium. Now it's just both of them. How long that will sustain is really going to depend on how good do those offenses continue to be. A lot of the Dodgers offenses projection of how are these guys going to hit together. And, you know, we'll see. Like, so far so good, but we'll see. You know, what the Braves did last year was probably not sustainable, but you can't really point at any of the individual players and say, well, that person played over their head, so maybe it is. So, you know, we'll see how that plays out over the course of the season. But that was very much something that we saw last year, is a material premium placed on players that just happen to be in the lineup on these elite offenses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of hoping those prices come down, even though I have classic cards of the Braves. I was able to get in on that. I got the number 2 Acuna before he really popped off. So that was a nice.
There was a buy window on Acuna. It just didn't last very long.
Yeah, it didn't. I don't like to pat myself on the back for purchases too often, but saw that one coming, and it worked out. Before, and you know, we should probably take this question and then maybe get some wrap-up thoughts and get out of here, because we've been going for an hour now. But a good question from Jump Shoot in the comments. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you, Everett. Do primary market credits factor into the algo at all? Yeah, the player's at a higher price, but the winner buyer got a 10% or a $10 discount, so the sale price wasn't the true price that was paid. I know theoretically that can happen where people will go above the market price because they have to win and then still pay market price. Does that factor in at all, or will it, I guess?
Currently, explicitly, no. Implicitly, though, in the cases where we see, for example, like an outlier sale that may or may not be related to the fact that primary market credits were leveraged, it may be, but there are other reasons why you might see an outlier sale. Someone just really likes the guy. I don't know. But we do have like outlier detection as a part of the algorithm. So if we see, for example, serial numbers 111 through 114 are going for $10, and then 115 goes for 35, and then 116 goes back to 10. We throw that data point out of our market value approximation just because we're like, that something weird happened there, and we don't necessarily know what it was. Maybe it was a market credit that had been stacked up for a long time. Maybe it was just someone fat fingered something. Who knows? But either way, it doesn't seem like it's reliable data, and so we'll throw that out in cases like that.
I'm glad there's consideration for us fat fingerers out there, because Lord knows I've done it. Well, all right. Like I said, we've been going an hour, so I think this might be a good place to break it off. We got through a lot of the procedural stuff and some of those general questions, and Everett did a great job of kind of laying out the high-level view of tiers for us. But before we get out of here, I know there were a couple other questions, or another player or two that I know we could go to war on, Kevin and I, but might have to save that for another day. Is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on before we get out of here?
No, I just appreciated the time with you guys. Enjoyed the conversation, and happy to if there's any other questions, either from you guys or from the chat that we want to touch on before we jump. Happy to do that.
The one thing I would add is, or I guess I'd like to hear about less in terms of tiers, but just kind of generally speaking, is the instant buys. I saw that soccer implemented them today for rares. I don't know if I think I saw that MLB is too. That's, which I think is great to see. I think it's good. I know I've seen some people kind of complain that, well, that's going to cap what I can sell my card for, which I don't think is realistic. I mean, you can't sell it for 12 times, what other cards are selling for, but it's rare that happens. So, so, I mean, it looks like what you're doing is good. Do you want to talk about at all how that price is set? It looks like it's dynamic. It looks like, if I buy an instant buy, the next one's going to go up, or at least if the auction price kind of gets close to it or exceeds it, it's going to go up. As far as that goes, and as far as what I'm interested in is, effect on how many cards are minted. Does there get to be a point where if people keep buying the instant buys, you just stop doing it? Or is it something where, because you keep increasing the prices, that's going to cool off the market in that sense? Can you kind of talk about how they work and what you expect to happen with them? I'm not getting anything.
Building up the anticipation. There you go.
Okay, sorry. Hey, you froze at the very end there, but I think I got the question. So yeah, at a high level, one, there is a limited amount of supply for each individual player card that we allow to go into instant buy. And there is also a continually rising price premium. The way that we think about it is really it's an opportunity to get the exact card that you want as quickly as you can get it, and pay a mild premium for the immediacy of adding a player to your gallery versus having to wait out an auction. So the prices will be dynamic as we try to keep them above, to a slight degree, the auction level, because I do think it's reasonable to expect a premium for that immediacy. So the prices will continue to go up as instant buys are purchased. The next one will be marginally more expensive as we try to reach an equilibrium price. But there is also a capped supply where, if we sell a certain amount of the same player at the same scarcity, right, like all in a row, we will remove that player from the instant buy marketplace for some period of time, until we've relatively normalized the supply of that player relative to the rest of the population. So both of those factors play into it.
I can say too, on the instant buy front, that it's something I've leveraged a lot in NBA. As a matter of fact, I did today, trying to finish up I can't believe I'm saying this, but a Charlotte Hornets collection. But I was able to secure a LaMelo Ball and still get the collection bonus via instant buy, even though he's not on auction because he's out for the rest of the year. And I got Mark Williams that way as well. So I'm excited about instant buy. We'll see if I do it on a rare card. I want to see what it takes for me to skip the line and grab someone there. But thank you guys for adding that and continuing to improve that side of things. I think it's a boon for a lot of people. So
one more thing on that, Everett. I mean, I don't know if you've seen data from yesterday, I guess, but I would imagine there were some cards that, sold for 2 or 3 times more than kind of what auctions were going for if a couple people, started buying up the instant buys. Is that something that you saw? And how is that going to affect the tiers going forward?
We saw, I would say, positive instant buy response so far. We've been pleased with how it's rolled out. I think to your point before, the community has appreciated that it's a way to add to their gallery with immediacy, and also to ensure that you get that incremental collection bonus. I leverage it the same way. If there's a 10% more an instant buy than the lowest secondary, then occasionally I'll just say, all right, I'll do the instant buy so I get the collection score bonus. So that it's definitely viable, and we've seen success from that. In terms of how it's going to impact the tiers going forward, something that we're still working through. Right now, it won't be explicitly included, but it's as instant buy becomes more prevalent, it's something that we're going to need to start considering. And so we have, as you can imagine, there's like an algorithm that powers what the prices are set at for instant buy. That is, one of many inputs into the tier algorithm. But there's certainly, it's a brand new feature. There's a lot of variable liquidity and different instant buy now that we need to sort through. Like, what are the longer term implications on what does this really mean for individual player value at a more granular level, before it starts like materially impacting the tiers in a way that we're uncomfortable with the output. There's a possibility that it makes the tiers even more accurate, because it's, hypothetically, more market data is always good. But that's just a hypothetical. Sometimes it can be a red herring. And so, still very, very early, particularly at Rare, obviously, where we have hours of data, not even months. But it's something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on and figure out the best way to make sure, ultimately that, our player values and our tiers are as reflective as possible of how the broad.
Do we lose him for good? Is that the end point? Okay. I think you're back. We lost it just at the end there, but I think he got through most of it. But I think
I can still see you, but
okay.
Maybe it's on my end.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Well, wonderful. I was thinking about how it might impact things more positively as well too, because if people are rushing to the instant buy to grab a certain player and that price does keep going up, I mean, that is a pretty solid signal that he is wanted, especially if there's multiple purchases within a window and that number kind of keeps ticking up even the same. Kevin, I see you kind of nodding. Do you disagree?
Well, the flip side of that is when it's solely because there's 4 games at Coors, and so I think you're going to see a ton of it,
right,
when there's 4 games at Coors. And so, one thing that kind of popped into my head when you were talking about that was, well, we talk a lot about price. Like, are you taking into usage percentage? Like, if a guy is, in 75% of lineups or something like that, is that something that plays a role? And along those same lines, the change in usage percentage, if a guy's in 75% of lineups and then the next week he's in 15, that seems to be a pretty good signal that was a 1 week spike, that you should not be using that kind of price information from that 1 week. Is that something you guys are currently considering? Is that something that you can, all that?
Yeah, it's a good call out. The short answer is no, that's not something we're explicitly considering right now, although it's definitely something that might be worth exploring. It's the same challenge that I mentioned, which is sometimes it's easy to identify whether a spike in value is explicitly short-term, and sometimes it's less. Sometimes increased opportunity is sustained increased opportunity, and sometimes it's, one really a one-size-fits-all answer to which of it is. It's particularly prevalent on the NBA side because so much of the gameplay utility comes from undervalued players that are, spot starting for a given week. And so there if you know that it's a 1-game injury,
right?
Spike a little bit harder because, closer gets hurt, setup man moves into the closer role. Well, you save opportunities, right? And we don't know that until we see it. So it's hard. We don't want to be predictive necessarily. We want to be as reactive as we possibly can be without trying to be predictive, because I'm not confident in how good any of us are at being that predictive. When it pertains to market specifically, like projecting output is one thing. Projecting how a market will react is, there are multi-billion-dollar businesses built on top of financial services trying to solve that problem, and in far more liquid markets, it's still unsolved. So I'm not sure we're the ones to do it.
That's a good point. I will ask, if you guys ever start pulling that usage data, please put it on the API. I would be eternally grateful. I don't know if that's feasible at all. But all right. Well, I think we're here. I think we've landed the plane. I am beyond excited that Sorare MLB is back. I'm so glad we can be talking about this. I'm so glad that theoretically I could eat my words on O'Neal Cruz on a future show because he's setting the world on fire. Things like that. So thank you again, Everett, so much for coming on here. And as always, the ability to inform us players on what's going on over there and kind of pulling that curtain back. It's very helpful in so many ways. So thank you for doing this.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, the community found this helpful, and don't hesitate to let me know if you want more of this in the future. We can figure out more opportunities for me to kind of peel that curtain back, and we're aiming for more transparency, more communication. We know it's been asked a lot. We're not trying to withhold information unnecessarily. So if there's other things that we want to talk about, we can have a follow-up conversation on those things.
Sounds good. And I feel as if you guys have done a great job of that in recent history. So I'm very satisfied on that front.
Appreciate it. Work in progress. We'll
sure.
Always be.
We're always
trying to get there.
Right. Likewise. And Kevin, obviously, thank you for being here. Thank you for voicing for the voiceless in a lot of these cases, even though I know Sorare is always listening, but putting Everett on the spot to answer some of these questions live.
Thanks for having me again. Thanks for doing this, Everett. It's much appreciated. And yeah, whether it's me or someone else from the community, I think it's great to do this. The more things like this we can do, the better. Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back. From what I understand, we're going to try to do this again. And Everett, you said we could do a little bit more in the future, some way or another. And we'll definitely be here for it. But yeah, baseball's on. Let's go enjoy some baseball, and hopefully we see y'all at the top of the leaderboards, maybe just under me, as I currently am holding up first in Rare All-Star. I'm sure that's going to hold up over the course of 3 more days of action. I'm positive, because that's how it always goes, right? Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hit that like button on the way out, all of that. I'm not going to grovel too hard, but thank you for tuning in, and thank you to you guys again. We will catch you next time. Enjoy that baseball.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.